Hi, everyone. This is Talkback. We've been having a wonderful summer. It's been a tough summer. We've got the pandemic, we've got racial violence, we have so many issues that we have to resolve in this country. The election is coming up. Oh, my goodness. But we have to have some time to be a little bit lighthearted and try to enjoy the time that we have together as well. So today I have someone who can be a lot of fun, but he's got a serious side also. He can be poignant and interesting as well as funny. Let me introduce my guest today, Michael Wolfe. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Sheila. Thanks for
Hi.
having me today.
Well, it's great to have you, and we'll tell about how we got introduced to one another. We'll talk about that. But may I introduce you as a 40-something angsty suburban guy? Is that who you are?
I wish you could call me a 40-something angsty guy. Unfortunately, I've passed that 50 mark.
Oh my! Well, you look good.
Oh, thank you. I'll take that. What I can take when I can get it. But yeah, so you passed that 50 mark. It definitely qualifies you for a new life stage. I just got my AARP card in the mail. Very exciting and devastating at the exact same time. Working through the emotional processes of joining the older demographics. So, but here I am. I'm proud.
Okay. I never liked the word senior. I still hate the word senior. I hate the word old, but that's what it is. When we were 55 and I went to the theater and I got my first senior ticket, I was horrified. I wanted to pay full price, but the friends of ours were treating us and they handed me my senior ticket. And I said, oh my goodness,
Absolutely.
I've arrived.
Exactly. You're still paying full price, just throwing money at them to pay for the youth admission fee. Yeah, we do it.
Right. So I introduced you as a writer, a humorist, and a content something or other. It's a very technical term. So just tell us, on your 9-to-5 job, what do you do? What the heck is content developer?
Content development is something that has always been a part of the media landscape, but especially now in a digital universe. There is so much need for new content out there, whether it's digital in nature, whether it's on social media, whether it's public relations content. What I do is, for individual clients, I will help them with their marketing content, produce press releases, new ideas for social feeds, things like that. And on my own, I develop content. I'm working on a documentary right now. I run podcasts. You can find me in all kinds of different channels and mediums, including on my own, which is where you and I first found each other.
So what kind of podcasts do you do?
Well, it's funny. The main podcast, I co-host a podcast that is called Past Tens, a top 10 time machine. It is a music nostalgia podcast for people who grew up talk about the AARP demo, right? Grew up with music from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. What we do each week is we pick a year at random, go back in time, and run through the top 10 songs on the Billboard charts from a given week of that year, and talk about whether the songs hold up well. We offer a ton of trivia and information that just brings the songs to life. But in reality, we're also kind of humorous guides deciding what deserved their status as top 10 songs and what really didn't. It's a lot of fun, and it's out there on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you want to find your podcast.
Sounds like fun. And when I was growing up, a little earlier than you, maybe a lot earlier than you, we'll see. They had a show on called Your Hit Parade. Do you remember that? Well, you didn't remember, but you probably have heard of it. And they would have the top 10 songs of the week on the Billboard charts. And they had people like Snooki Lanson was on that show. I don't know.
Okay, now you're dating yourself, Sheila.
Yes, I very much am.
Kasem. It was Casey Kasem with American Top 40. And I was, just as a kid, unnaturally obsessed with pop culture charts and trivia. I could name the top 10 television shows at every week on the Nielsen charts. I knew what the big movies were. And yes, I studied those American Top 40 broadcasts. So this is a chance to kind of look back on those days. And honestly, some of the songs, you go through these countdowns, we have a blast because some of them are great and memorable and we love them.
Yeah.
Some of them are so horrifyingly awful and have held up so poorly that it's kind of fun to poke fun at ourselves for liking it.
Right. Well, it's all that technology. Yeah. My granddaughter showed me over the weekend, I don't know how long it took her, to put her Spotify playlist onto my Alexa. Finally got it done. Anyway.
Sheila, it's not that hard. Call me.
It's hard for me. It's hard. Meanwhile, I think I mentioned Alexa. I hear her talking to me in the other room already.
She's sitting here over here. I better be careful.
And my husband doesn't trust her. He thinks Alexa is listening into all our secrets. I don't know.
The choice to put an Alexa in your bedroom is fraught with peril. So I suggest you maybe move that into the living room and just leave that over there.
Okay, so we know that music is one of your interests, but you also, the way we found you is you also have your own website called Too Lazy to Write a Book Because It's Too Damn Hard. And you put out actually fairly long, sometimes thoughtful, humorous pieces on different subjects, right? How long have you been doing that?
I've been doing it for about 6 or 7 years, and I do it as inspiration strikes. I don't find myself forced to post things, just to, meet a deadline or feed an audience. In this case, when I just get inspired by something that I found amusing or poignant in my own life, I put it up there. And they're stories. They're not a lot of blogs that you will read are stream of consciousness thoughts that may just have current events at their centerpiece. That's not what this is. My blog is really just meant to tell stories from my own life that I think others will find connections with. Usually,
absolutely.
Usually,
they're like short stories. You've got a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a lot of thought that went into it. It's not just one big yuck at all. People should know that. But we did have a few yucks with your one piece that we found about the 40 top Jewish foods that you ranked. It created such a sensation for so many people that we contacted you. We had you on a Zoom. So I wanted you to tell us, what inspired you to write that? And then what developed? How did it become such a sensation? And what has happened to you since that piece?
Sheila, it's shocking. The things that you think will touch a nerve, this was not one of them, to be honest. As I said, I write about things that connect with my own personal life. And I grew up Jewish. I was a secular Jew, if you will. I was not particularly observant, grew up in a Reformed Jewish family, but we practiced most of the major holidays. We probably fit the typical portrait of what a current American Jew looks like. That means we're not exactly in shul every Friday night, but come Yom Kippur, we're there. We go on the important holidays. Don't you worry, we're fasting. But one day I was sitting down, it was actually at Rosh Hashanah, and we were eating many of the foods that we would prototypically describe as Jewish foods. And I sort of said to myself, I've always kind of thought of Jewish food as almost like a punishment at times. I mean, anybody who sat down as a 4-year-old and told to eat chopped liver, which is chopped liver, is not somebody. Delicious.
Don't talk about it that way.
I've come around. But I decided just to sit down and say, you know what? It would be really fun for me to go through the experience of revisiting all of these Jewish foods that I either grew up with or I'm still consuming today. But instead of just writing about them generally, I put myself on the line and I said, I'm going to do a ranking from worst to first. And I chose 40 foods that I thought were considered sort of the canons of the current American Jewish food tradition. And I ranked them. And all I did, Sheila, was put it up on my website, which has a small following, but nothing that I would call anything extreme. And next thing I know, without any promotion or publicity, it started to get shared, first on social media channels, and then via email, to the point that I began to get letters and correspondence from first all over the country and then all over the world, all without any major media pushing it or promoting it. It was really, really fun, satisfying, because it struck a nerve that was both humorous but also nostalgic for so many people who read it. It was really fun to just watch it fly.
But you didn't just list them for each item. You gave a picture, and you told a little paragraph about each one, so it got people really much more involved than if you had just listed the top 40. So, when I prepared the article for our local newspaper in preparation for having the Zoom with you, I did some research. And of course, the first thing you come up with is you learn that Jews love to talk about food, and they talk about it all the time. We can't wait to decide what we're having next for dinner, right? What are you having for lunch? What are you having for dinner? What should we have tomorrow? But the other interesting thing is that we adapted our food to the countries that we lived in. And I was reading that the reason we have chicken soup is because there was a pandemic, there was a plague, and all the meat was diseased. So they had to have chicken. And then how did matzo balls come about? They couldn't have noodles with their chicken soup on Passover. So there comes the matzo ball. So I learned so many interesting things about Jews and food over the years. And for someone like you and the kind of Judaism that you live with, the cultural Jew, the suburban, the synagogue goer a few times a year, we use food as a way of keeping our identity as Jews when we're not very religious. So that's an interesting point too. It identifies us, the chopped liver, the bagels, the kishka, and so forth. What do you have to say about that?
So many cultures define themselves by their foods. And now let me be clear, and we talked about this. That piece that I wrote had no interest in being the authority, even though it was fake authoritative by its title, being the 40, ranking the 40 foods definitively. I had no interest in making any major statements as an Epicurean or as an intellectual. I really was trying to have some fun. But as I saw the piece strike this nerve, it definitely reinforced the fact that not just Jewish cultures, but all cultures often identify themselves through the foods that they've learned to assemble over their thousands of years of existence, in our case. And yeah, the diaspora and Jewish culture definitely fed a lot of those, what are now considered sort of secular Jewish foods, right? We assembled little pieces from various cultures into one. And now I honestly do think there is an American Jewish food culture that is in and of itself reflected in that list.
Exactly. And the other interesting thing is that you learn that almost every Jewish holiday, Jewish celebration has a celebratory meal associated with it. And certain foods, like you had apples and honey, well, that's associated with certain days of the year, right? Certain holidays. The things that you listed combine with the important days in the calendar, and then there's that. Yeah.
We know how to eat in well, we do in the Wolfe household, I'll tell you that. But I sometimes questioned our choices. One of the things I wrote about in that piece was how I would look at my Italian friends and see these glorious bowls of pasta and these amazing Italian feasts that I was jealous of when I had to go home and eat gefilte fish, right? I thought we were cheating ourselves a little bit. But I had a little bit of a reckoning as I ran through this list and realized that it's not just a bagel and cream cheese that we have to celebrate in Jewish food. There's a lot more too. There are also some extraordinarily questionable food choices that I despise, but it turns out there are lovers of pickled herring and sour cream all over this country, despite my nauseous hatred of even the sight of it. But
so tell me, looking at your Italian friends and their voluminous plates, the portions of the pasta and the wonderful, all that. Everyone loves Italian food. No, without question. What Jewish foods would you say you could finish the whole plate and ask for seconds? How many Jewish foods?
The matzo ball soup that you brought up before, there is, I think it must be a small line in the bar mitzvah ceremony that requires you as an adult to ask for seconds. You don't stop with the first bowl of matzo ball soup, right? You go back for more. And on top of that, even though I didn't rank it at the top of my list, you think about the best corned beef and pastrami sandwiches from the classic Jewish delis, especially in New York City. You're not allowed to leave even a small piece of that meat sitting there on the table. You've got to finish I don't
Right.
care if it's the stage deli sandwich that's this big. You may have to bring it home, but you're not wasting that. And we talked about that a little bit. Boy, do I miss.
Yeah, we did. We said that in the Carnegie pastrami
Oh,
brought home 8 extra slices of rye bread so we could have another 8 sandwiches from the 20 pounds of meat they stuck in between 2
right,
slices
right.
of bread.
At the
But you
same
make
time, we
another
talked
you
about,
make another point. You make
oh,
another interesting point with seconds. What happens when you don't want seconds? That your bubby or your mother or your Aunt Sadie says to you, "What's the matter? You don't like my chicken soup?"
they
Right? If
fought
you
with
don't have
Carol.
seconds, you couldn't possibly like it.
No, huge mistake. You have to know your place, right? If you eat the second helping just to make the family glue work, right? Apologies if you're hearing this lawnmower in my background,
No,
but
I didn't hear it, but yeah, no, it's fine.
good.
So, before we move on to other topics you've talked about, one last thing. What would you say was the most angry, outrageous letter that you got complaining about your rankings?
The vast majority of the letters, 99% of them, found great humor in the piece, right? And they would take exceptions with my rankings, all of them, you know. People love kasha varnishkas out there. I had no idea. I'm not even sure if your viewership knows what kasha varnishkas is. I mean, they're basically noodles with buckwheat sauteed in some kind of onion, which I think sounds as terrible as it is, but others disagree with
With
me.
bow tie pasta, with a bow tie pasta.
Bow tie,
Right.
I have to be bow tie. Good point. Never had a thing for that. You know, so a lot of the arguments were, well, you ranked gefilte fish too high. Wait, you ranked gefilte fish too low. You know, it was this constant back and forth. But I did get the occasional academic email that took exception to my focus on only one half of the Jewish food canon. You know, there are Ashkenazi Jews that had their derivations in Eastern Europe and Russia and things like that, and there are Sephardic Jews that were more Middle Eastern. I have that right, correct? And so my family all came from the Ashkenazi side.
Right.
As you can probably see from my skin tone, my relatives did not see the sun for it must have been at least 70,000 years.
80% of American Jews are Ashkenazi Jews.
Exactly.
So that's
right. And so those foods tend to rise in terms of the consciousness of our culture here in the United States. Some Jews who came from Sephardic backgrounds felt that I had intentionally missed an entire section of the Jewish food canon, when in reality, it just wasn't part of my upbringing. So I got 1 or 2 upset letters. And I also had one 92-year-old from Florida threaten to revoke my Jewish marriage license and kick me out of the religion. I think in her mind, I was unnecessarily unfair to the gefilte fish, I believe, which I thought I ranked perfectly fairly, if you will.
No, there were lots of fights about gefilte fish and chopped liver. Very controversial.
The only universal agreement was in ranking. I think it was number 5 on my list. I put Chinese food on Christmas towards the top of the list, and pretty much everybody agreed. That's exactly where.
That's it. Right. Yeah, because you can get kosher Chinese too, so that's fine for the kosher folks on Christmas. Yes. Yep. So it was interesting that what started out as something that you wanted to do humorously, and you said it was your definitive, absolutely correct list. Of course, you were joking, but you know, people took it seriously because people take their food choices very seriously. So you struck a chord that was terrific. So let's move on to other topics. You've written so many nice pieces. I want to touch on them. One that you wrote about talked about marriage, the relationships, and the words that we say to one another and the meanings behind them. And you did a very nice piece on the newlywed game that you played. And you said, be careful of board games. Tell us about that.
That's very funny. First of all, my wife is an extraordinarily patient and understanding human being, because I use her and my family as fodder for most of what I write.
Now, wait a minute, Michael. You're just prefacing this in case you're going to say something else that she might not be happy with, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. This is your blanket apology, right? Okay.
The asterisk on everything. I love her, right?
Okay.
That essay I wrote was about, remember the old Newlywed Game?
Oh,
where
sure.
you sit down with
I
your
remember the old Newlywed Game,
Of
the
course.
real Newlywed.
Wait, what was the host's name? I'm blanking on his name now.
Oh, I
Was it Wink
forgot.
Martindale or something? Was that him?
Wink Martindale? I don't remember.
I can't remember. Doesn't matter.
All right.
Well,
One of those guys.
we had sat down with another couple and we were playing a board game version of this, because I was joking when I used board games as BORED, because often we play those things when we are bored, but that is dangerous. And the question came up in which you were asked if you could describe your spouse in a single word, what would it be? And I think my wife was expecting me to regale her with something about passion and love and beauty and whatever. And in a bit of idiocy, I decided to be brutally honest, and I chose the word organized. And my wife erupted with a fury of 30 suns, beaming their radiation into my eyeballs by saying, "Organized? You chose organized for me?" And I sat in a marital doghouse for about 3 weeks after that brutal mistake. So my lesson to everybody who plays games in which you are identifying your loved one, don't try to be clever or truthful. Just go for what your wife wants to hear. Feed the audience what they need.
Exactly. So what, did she have a word for you?
I think the game ended abruptly after I let that one out. That's the end of it. I don't think we stuck around for to find out. I'm sure it was nice. Well, I chose organized as a compliment. I am a messy, disorganized, creative person where things are flying all over the place. My wife brings structure to our lives. We'd be a mess without it. So I thought I was offering her a compliment.
I'm sorry, Michael, there's no romance in structure. Zero.
It's a 101.
Zero.
Marriage 101. But I felt it was my mission to let my readers know not to repeat my mistakes. That's all.
Okay. So it's in so relationships have their humorous sides. Obviously, you and your wife are still together. That one incident didn't break the marriage up, right?
We worked our way through it as best.
We worked through it, you know. And
like I said, she's a good sport, and I often write. And the reason why I think people enjoy the columns and stories that I post is they're not fanciful. You know, oftentimes people look at these social media portraits that we present of ourselves, especially a younger generation. They feel that they have to present this idealized vision of who they are, these dream lives that they possess. Oftentimes what I write about are the exact opposite. The mistakes we make, the imperfections that we share, these goofy moments in which we make fools of ourselves that we would ordinarily be embarrassed about. But in reality, to me, that's the spice of life. And I think people enjoy the things that I write because they see themselves in it, even if they don't have the innate ability to put themselves out there the way that I do.
right. Well,
People just saying, you speak the truth and you make us laugh at the same time.
Right. Well, when you're capturing the little things, the small moments in life that lead to actually big things that are reflections of your feelings and of big things. You're right. You're not talking about great philosophies and great causes, but you're talking about human interactions, and it's the little incidents in life that make it worthwhile and that bring you the connections. Yeah. So you did that with your children. So you have twins?
I have twins. They are no longer
girl and a boy.
I have a girl that hit me like a ton of bricks when they were born. You definitely do not get to focus on, you have this image of having a baby where you're cuddling and cradling and giving all your love and attention. Not when there's another one screaming right next to them. So twins was a unique challenge. We'll put it that way.
Okay. And they're both off away from home now at school?
Not right now, they're not. Thank you, pandemic coronavirus.
Well, okay.
They are of college age and they are attending school in the fall. They're home for the summer because most of their summer jobs have been canceled, although they're working locally. But they will be, knock on wood, back at school, whatever it looks like, at the end of August.
So you wrote two what I thought were affecting pieces. There was some humor in them, but really you were reaching for, longing for a relationship with both of your children. You talked about, and I'll let you finish, but talked about how difficult it is sometimes in today's world with the kids so involved with other social media and things outside of home life. How do you connect with them, with, dad and son, dad and daughter? So why don't you talk about the relationship with your son and how you started out somewhat estranged and things you did together and then worked your way through to something great. Tell us about that.
That piece was one of the more serious ones I wrote about, like you said, with my humor sprinkled in. But I had actually struggled a bit with my son in high school. We had started to kind of fray, as many people do with their teenagers. Again, very few people seem to be willing to talk about the challenges we have relating to our kids as they grow, as they stress for independence and things. We put these pictures of smiling families up on Facebook and assume that that defines everybody. Well, I had some issues with my son, who's a wonderful kid, but we were losing the ability to communicate with each other. And I kind of had a realization one day that we had sort of lost a common language. And that oftentimes language, as I've mentioned to you before, that I grew up with sort of pop culture at my essence, that often it's the culture that we consume that helps us create those common languages, whether it's a father taking their son to a baseball game and learning how to keep score, or a father and his daughter. I wrote about my dancing in my daughter's ballet. That's a whole nother story, but that's a funny one.
We'll get to that. Yeah.
We'll get to it. Well, with my son, I started to notice that he started to develop a passion for film, but almost more interested in the Oscars history, the lists of Best Picture winners and such, and who won Best Actor and such. But he'd never actually seen some of the films that he had learned so much about just by being obsessed with the Academy Awards. So I ended up just on a whim one day, and I wish I could say it was some grand strategy, but it was just a stroke of momentary genius where I turned to him and I said, instead of watching YouTube videos all day, why don't you start to watch some of the films that you seem so interested in? And you know what? Why don't I do it with you? And you could see him sort of perk up in a way that I hadn't seen in years. And literally that day, we devised this project in which we chose 50 films. They all had to be from a certain era so that my son could relate to them in some way. So it was sort of, I think, from 1970 on. He chose 35 of them. I chose 15 of them. And we set about over a year watching each one of those films together. And it changed everything. We all of a sudden found that common vocabulary. When we were straining to find things that we felt connected about, we could go back to that film dialogue and conversation. It didn't mean we were good to go, all the time. Fights would still string up and we'd have our occasional challenges, but it found a common bond that brought us close together again. And I think saved our relationship. He ended up writing about it as a thesis for a senior year project. I wrote that piece, which got picked up in a lot of places. And it really was a moving experience. And we watched some great movies at the same time. I mean, it's a pretty good.
How old was your son when you first started this project? And how often did you actually sit down and watch the movies with him?
He was in high school, and we sat down once a week, sometimes twice a week, to do it. I mean, we made a point of watching them together whenever we could. There were a few that he decided he needed to watch on his own. I think one of the films on the list was called Boogie Nights, which he knew was about.
God, I saw that. Yeah.
He did not want to watch that with me, and I gave that to him. He could have that one on his own. But most of them we watched together, and all of them we talked about. Nothing too scholarly necessarily, but he ended up digging really deep into the messaging of almost all of these films, all of which were critically acclaimed. As I realized I probably should have substituted some classic comedies in there to lighten the mood, but he was more intrigued with Oscar winners and such. So we really worked through this canon together and had a great time doing it, and it still to this day resonates in our relationship. We're able to.
Every one of these films every one of these films had to have some connection to the Academy Awards in some category, right? That have some,
or at least be critically acclaimed in hindsight. Yes,
yeah.
some connection to film history. If you go to the story on my website, toolazydowriteabook.com, you can see the list of movies that we chose.
Right, I have it.
We
Yeah.
had veto power over a couple of the films that we chose because we wanted to have the other person have a sense of control. And the other rule was neither of us, Jacob could not have seen it already. So he had seen
Right.
a few other movies. So the list isn't complete,
Well,
but
yeah.
it was great.
When you were doing this, how many of the 50 films had you already seen in your lifetime before you did?
I had seen almost every one of them, not all of them, almost everyone. I'd say maybe there were 4 or 5 of the 50 that I hadn't seen already, but I was careful not to approach it from sort of the student professor kind of relationship. I was not trying to be his teacher because I realized that was part of the source of the tension. I just wanted to be along for the ride, and when he was ready to talk about it, I wanted to be there to do it with him, and it worked. It worked so well.
All right, so I have your list. I won't read all of them, but you had adaptation, Almost Famous, Amadeus, Annie Hall, of course, Breaking Away, Brokeback Mountain, L.A. Confidential, Goodfellas. Oh, loads of The Theory of Everything, more modern one, When Harry Met Sally. Of course, The Godfather, Saving Private Ryan, Schindler's List, Raging Bull, Rain Man, Mystic River, Million Dollar Baby, etc. All the great films of the last 30, 40 years without question.
Like a chore to sit through, right? I mean, he put in one film that I hadn't seen before. It was an animated movie called Spirited Away, which was wildly critically acclaimed, but I had never seen before. So watching it with my new eyes, with him as in the same, interestingly enough, he liked it a lot more than I did. Although I did enjoy it. I was not as moved by it as he was. But yeah, these were not terrible movies I was concerned that he was not going to enjoy. He liked almost.
Right.
The one thing I was surprised about was how much he loved Annie Hall. I didn't think he'd be able to relate to Annie Hall as a 16, 17-year-old boy. He loved it. At the time, he thought it was one of the best movies he had ever seen. It was
I see Hannah. My favorite Woody Allen movie is Hannah and Her Sisters. It's not on your list. That's my favorite. Well, it's not one he might appreciate. Yeah.
I think he probably, that's Michael Caine and others in that. But yeah, I thought that was a little bit too mature relationships and things like that. I specifically left, I think it was Ordinary People off that list. I just didn't think he'd have any relation to it. But the others he just started to appreciate from a storytelling standpoint and a filmmaking standpoint.
All right, let's have a flash quiz. Flash quiz from you. Give me your top 3 films.
Oh, wow. Okay, this is really good. I'll tell you the 3 films that made the biggest impact on me. One was a film that my mother ran a dance school when I grew up in Westchester County. I grew up in New Rochelle, New York. She ran a dance school that was in Scarsdale, New York. This poor, baseball obsessed young man had to spend half of his weekends at a modern dance school, just, watching the various dancers, but which wasn't actually so terrible when you were trying to meet girls at that age. But I was introduced to a film called All That Jazz, which I don't know if you've ever seen. It was a Bob Fosse film.
Fosse's, of course.
I, for some reason, loved that film and love it to this day. I don't think
it's like his biography, actually. It's sort of like his biography. Yeah.
It's Roy Scheider stars in it. I think he's brilliant. Right. Ben Green, Anne Rankin. It's just a great, great, great film. And actually, he watched it with me, and he loved it as well. That wasn't on the list because we had already seen it together. I would also put The Godfather, Goodfellas in a sort of group together as mob films. They're very different, but they're both sensational movies that still hold up to this day. The Godfather, he found a little bit slow, a young kid who's used to a little bit more immediate action. The Godfather sort of unfolds a lot slower, but the themes are still resonant and such. So I put that near the top of my list. And I'll put myself back in my 17-year-old shoes try to imagine who I was when my son was watching movies. And my baseball obsessed brain loved The Natural with Robert Redford, which is just a fairy tale and not true to the story, the Malamud story that it was based on. But I loved its American fable like environment that just hooked me in from the get-go.
My grandson just watched it, and we put that on the list with Bull Durham, which was a good baseball film.
Bull Durham is the best, in my mind. Bull Durham is the best baseball movie ever made.
Absolutely.
Bull Durham, Moneyball, and The Natural are to me the best baseball films ever made.
Okay, how about actors now? Who are your 3 favorite actors in the movies, not TV or broad movies?
Favorite actors? That's tough because, you've got Hollywood actors, right? When you're going to see, a Tom Cruise movie, it's going to deliver on a Tom Cruise kind of level, right? But my favorite actors would probably be Denzel Washington, who blows me away in almost anything he does. His Academy Award performance in Training Day is just a sight to behold, and pretty much anything he does, like I said. It's too cliched to go with a Pacino, so I'm going to leave him off. I do happen to love Dustin Hoffman. He just hasn't been around forever, but what he used to do in the past always used to be really impressive. And the late, great Philip Seymour Hoffman made every single movie he was in better. It didn't matter what size role he had. He inhabited whatever he was given and simply became that part. I suppose Daniel Day-Lewis would do the same thing, but I loved the fact that Philip Seymour Hoffman could play small roles with just as much impact as he could these dynamic leading parts. So
now, so now we got that, and we saw your relationship with your son. So let's talk about with your daughter. And you already referred to the fact that your mother ran a school, was the director of a dance school, and you had an opportunity to have a better connection with your daughter. Explain that.
Well, it's interesting. When we were lucky enough as parents these days to have women's sports become so much more prominent than when we grew up. So when you have an athlete in the family, you get to do the things that all parents of athletes get to do. You get to bring them to games, watch them at practices, maybe even practice with them as they develop. Well, my daughter was not interested in sports at all. She fell immediately into dance. She obviously inherited my mother's genes without necessarily even meaning to push her that way. But the challenge of having a daughter in dance is that the parent, especially one who has no dance talent whatsoever, plays no role. I mean, my job, if anything, was to drive her to dance school, pick her up when it was over, and then go see her show. So there was no way to become as intimately involved with her passion as I would have in many other cases. So when the opportunity came, when her dance school sent out an email, this was years ago when she was still young, looking for a volunteer father to appear as Clara's father in their version of the Nutcracker, my wife said, you might want to do this. And I took her up on it. And the challenge is that I don't have a problem being on stage. You can see I can talk to a wall, or in this case, a random microphone here. But, I can perform, but there is a moment in this show in which you actually have to dance. There's some choreography. If I don't do the dance right, I screw up the show. So the act of appearing in this became this almost Follies-like a disaster, at least in my eyes, as I was trying to learn and practice and rehearse. And I honestly thought for a minute that I was going to screw up this entire performance for the 150 girls that were appearing in the Nutcracker. But luckily and fortunately, I brought things down to a good level. And when I had the chance to interact with my daughter backstage on the night of the first performance, my heart melted. I realized this is exactly what I should be doing. And then the show went off without a hitch. So I wrote about that experience that was both hilarious, but also really, really personally meaningful.
Well, how did you look in How did you look in your tutu and your costume or whatever?
Yeah, it was this ridiculous. First of all, these weathered. I was supposed to be this aristocrat, with these long flowing robes and things like that, and puffy shirts and things like that. I looked absurd. I looked ridiculous. There's no way. I can't. I'll show you a picture, Sheila, if you want. You can see it online. It ain't pretty. I think their attention was rightfully placed on the girls' costumes and how gorgeous they looked. They just slapped some makeup on my gigantic forehead here and said, "Go."
Okay.
But man, was it fun. It was really, really fun. And I did it for 7 years, I think.
Great. So 2 things come out of that. You had fun. You looked ridiculous. So there was humor, but it's very poignant. You got to connect with your daughter. She really appreciated you doing it. And don't mention your mom. Your mother had died by the time your daughter performed.
She had died that year. And so that was part of what drove me, was the thought that somewhere, somehow, she was looking down and seeing her granddaughter and her son on stage together. And in the final year of her Nutcracker, as she grew into bigger and bigger parts, she actually played my wife in one of the performances, which sounds a little shaky, right? But it was a beautiful, it was great. We got to dance truly together on stage. And if my mother was ever smiling, that would have knocked her.
Michael, you're getting me verklempt, getting verklempt. So we have to,
right.
So we have to get funny. We have to get to more humor. But no, I'm sure that
the humor came, Sheila, when I was backstage with these professional dancers that they would hire to fill the main roles, dressed in these skin-tight leotards. And let's just say it enhanced certain aspects of their manhood that made
This is a PG. This is a PG. It's a PG show. PG.
My apologies. Go and read the piece. You'll see there's some smiles in there. So, and the smiles at my own expense, for sure.
All right. So now I want to get to a little of the humor. You wrote a piece that really strikes at the heart of everything we do 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times a year. We go to affairs. We call them affairs, They're celebrations, bar mitzvahs. And you wrote a story. How do you go to a bar mitzvah if you've never been to one before? What do you do and what is it like? Michael, tell us about it.
I called it the indispensably honest guide to attending your first bar bat mitzvah, which was, at this point in the Northeast, I'm not sure if there's anybody who hasn't actually been to one of these things, but that was sort of the point of the piece, is that there are so many cliches that run through the bar mitzvah process, almost none of which has to do with the actual religious aspects of it. But I wrote a 3-part breakdown that took readers through every part of the bar mitzvah journey, from the actual service itself to the gift you're supposed to give, to the party, the cocktail reception, to the parties, and over the top celebration, if you will, of the ridiculousness, but also the fun of the modern bar mitzvah.
Well, Michael, we're now in the age of Zoom. I have to tell you my own personal life. My grandson is going to be bar mitzvahed by Zoom. We're not going to be able to. We're not going to be able to have the $1 million cruise line to have the celebration, or rent the Hall of Halls or the whole of Central Park or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So we're gonna have to tone down. So the kind of things that you gave us tips for may be a thing of the past, but either way, you still have to get an invitation, even if it's only a Zoom invitation. So you told me about something that I was thinking about my whole life. How do I know I'm on the A list or the B list?
It's all a matter of timing. You get that any invitation that shows up to the bar mitzvah, anything 1 month or less, that means you were probably a B-lister. I hate to say it. And look, there's no shame. They're offering you free food and alcohol. Take the invite. Go to the party. There's nothing wrong with being on the B list, right? Just, lower the amount of the gift slightly. The B list means your obligation to pay is somewhat reduced. It's like the AARP discount, right? You're going to take it once they give it to you.
All right. So then how about dress? When they say black tie and then your Uncle Saul comes in with a t-shirt, what goes on with those with that stuff? Did
Oh,
they let him in or what?
there's a whole language around attire, right? And we always mess with people by saying things are either preferred or encouraged. And, if you're not going to be very specific, you're going to have to expect that people are going to play fast and loose, right? The one thing I've always noticed, for some reason, this is a problem with Jewish men. If they are in suits, they're always, always one size too big. And inevitably, by the way, if you're a parent, your son is going to take off their suit jacket, put it on the ground somewhere, pick up another one, and basically go home with some camp friend from Massachusetts suit jacket while yours is sitting who knows where across the country. There's an interchangeability, I think, with 13-year-olds suits. Now, the women, meanwhile, are dressed in beautiful cocktail dresses. And I think I said that the teenage girls are dressed like hookers or something. There's a very unacceptable balance there that I think we finally started to revise. But yeah, the attire can be a very difficult thing. Don't wear a t-shirt to the bar mitzvah. I think that's fairly safe.
But you didn't talk about some of my pet peeves, and that is, of course, the older you are in the crowd, the further away from the dance floor they put you. They put you almost in the back, way in the back.
For your own protection.
Is that what it is? Well, I have to tell you, you need to talk about this too. The last affair I went to, and I was way in the back, the band was still so loud, we had to go into the ladies' room to have a discussion. We couldn't hear each other talk.
Don't you miss, now that we're all stuck here at home, I would kill to have my ears blown out by a bar mitzvah band. I would do anything for that.
Well, you didn't talk about this either. What about the hierarchy? You can have a band that's top, but most of them don't have bands now. They have DJs, right? That's
I have a philosophy about that if you can't afford a great band, just get a DJ, because there's nothing worse than a terrible band playing at your wedding or your bar mitzvah. I think it's just easier to have the DJ these days. And the kids want their music, and bands can't play hip hop. They just can't. I mean, some can. The typical bar mitzvah band, it's not in their repertoire.
Yeah.
They're getting old, Sheila. And they always play, it's almost like the lights start functioning in a different way. When the old people section of music comes on, they play that, Earth, Wind, and Fire song or the Charleston or something like that, oh, this is our time. And all of a sudden it's like the red parts and all the kids go out and we move in. It's very structured.
Well, I think these days, I think in the old days, the bar mitzvah was really for the old people, and they had one table of the kids, and they spent most of the time outside the hall. Today, we're so indulgent with our children. The old people are just sitting and bored, and the music's not for them. It's too loud, and the kids are having a blast, right? It's changed.
We carry these kids in like kings to these ceremonies. Right. The moment where they say, give it up for the bar mitzvah boy, and they carry them in like the throne of Egypt or something. Meanwhile, I'm not exactly sure what we're supposed to be giving it up, but they're always telling us to give something up. What are we giving? We're giving our time. We're giving our money. What more do they want from us?
Right. And then the speeches by the parents, so the kid's really a brat, he's sucked the wind out of them their whole lives, and they have to pay all this money and they have to come up there and say what a fantastic young man he's turned out to be, right?
I thought it was interesting that the bar mitzvah speech would always talk about what a great job they did at the ceremony with their Torah portion or whatever. That speech was written weeks before the event. They had no idea. What if the kids screwed it up? Shouldn't they mention that in the speech? But nope, it's always got to be perfect, right?
Michael, you have to transpose this bar mitzvah stuff to the wedding stuff, because you've got a lot of material when it comes to the toasts. The toasts, the people who don't know how to leave the stage, and that's another column for you.
I am working on a book. I know it's against my website's mantra, right? But I am working on a concept that will extend the secular Jewish life into segments and perhaps build an overall portrait of what it's like in our world these days. So stay tuned on that.
Yeah, and of course we have to finish that topic though, talking about the food, because first, have you talked about the smorgasbords and about like the 20 rooms, one devoted to each type of food, appetizing food? And that's before the main event when you walk in the dining room with another whole meal, right? What about that?
There is nothing that is more treasured in all of Jewish society than a mini hot dog wrapped in pastry at a bar mitzvah cocktail party. There will be elbows thrown and rugby-like brawls getting to the man with the mini hot dog tray at the cocktail party. We lose all sense of propriety when a little Hebrew National shows up, despite the fact that we can get them whenever we want at the grocery store after the event.
I have to add to that the lamb chops. Lamb chops.
And the challenge with the lamb chop is the balancing act. You've got your drink in one hand, you've got your plate in the other.
Right.
What are you working? How are you actually eating that lamb chop? It involves marital harmony. Somebody has to hold while the other eats. It's very challenging.
Yeah. Well, I have a good husband. He goes around and scouts the whole place first and brings me back all the good stuff. So you need to do that with your wife next time.
I'd say he's a keeper, Sheila.
All right. So, Michael, what else do you find amusing in life? Not just amusing, but some lessons for life. What else strikes your fancy?
My fancy as a whole? Look, I said it before. We're all striving for connections, right? I tend to disarm with humor. It drives my family crazy because in serious moments, I'm always good to try to bring things down a bit. But boy, I think that's needed at a time like this right now, right? We're all stressed and strained, and for good reason. We're concerned about our lives. We don't know what the fall holds for us right now. I found leaning back and watching a good comedy on television. I watched a movie called Midnight Run the other day, which was a Charles Grodin, Robert De Niro comedy from the 80s or 90s. And it brought a smile to my face that I needed so badly. My only thought is that now is the time to take things seriously, but find those moments just to smile. And even if it's artificial, even if it's listening to a comedy album on Spotify or watching an old television show that you know is going to make you laugh. Boy, we need it right now, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And we have the opportunity because we're all home and we all have a million screens, right? A million places to watch these things.
Why we're doing that podcast I mentioned before, that Past Tense, is nostalgia brings a certain smile to the front, right? That maybe the food piece did the same thing. But even listening to an old song and laughing at why were we listening to this back in 1984? Or I didn't know, this inane fact about the derivation of some song. We've heard from listeners who've just said it gives them a break and they just smile and remember where they were when they first heard this, but also interested in learning new things about the context. So it's why we're doing that and why we're excited about keeping that going. And I hope maybe some of your viewers will come and check it out.
So yes, before we leave, give us your website again.
Okay. Well, the website with my stories are toolazytowriteabook.com. That's www.toolazytowriteabook.com. You can't forget that one. You can check out the podcast, Past Tense, A Top 10 Time Machine, either on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any place you'd listen to podcasts, or the podcast has its own website, at www.timemachinepod.com. That's timemachinepod.com, where all of our old episodes and links to all the music are all up there as well.
Okay, great. So you've given us a needed shot of humor, good humor, and also some nice poignant thoughts as well about families and connections and the things that we care about in this world. So thank you, Michael. We'll see you soon. We'll keep track of your book, and you'll be more famous than ever. when the phone
Thanks,
is
Sheila.
set.
It's been a lot
Okay.
of fun. Thank you.
Okay. Take care, Michael. And goodbye, everyone. We'll see you next time on Talkback. Actually, tomorrow, another show on women's suffrage, on the League of Women Voters. Important stuff. The 100th anniversary of women getting the right to vote. See you next time on Talkback. Bye.